So welcome to this video, which is going to be an introduction to educating on Zoom. This is a modification of another session, which was run in a more interactive format, where participants of the session were given first-hand experience of what it was like to be a participant in a Zoom call, interacting with all the different various features of Zoom. So this particular video is being recorded from the host perspective. So what you'll be able to see is sort of the controls that I have access to and how I go through and facilitate that particular session. So to help me out with this, what I have done is I have connected a couple of dummy participants. So I've got an iPad and also my phone connected so that we have some participants in this particular meeting that we're going to be able to push through some of the features. So to start off with, what I'm going to do is actually start up my Zoom call. So I'm going to jump out of here and I'm going to click Start. I've already logged into my account. I'm going to join with the computer audio, and usually I would share my video and it would show up in this particular box here, but you can see here it's saying that the video camera is already in use. That's because I have screen capture software going over my screen at the same time as running this Zoom call. So you'll be able to see my face down in the bottom corner here, but usually if you weren't sort of recording your screen at the same time using a different piece of software, you'd be able to see my face, exactly what's in that box in this particular one here. All right, so we're now in our Zoom call. So probably what I want to do is share with my participants a welcome screen that tells them, yes, you're in the right place. So in order to do that, I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint slides, and this here is the page I want to share with them. Now, one way to do it is to click Play Slideshow and then share this full screen version. Now, a limitation of doing that is from the host side. It means that this page sort of takes up your full screen as well. So if you want to have other things on your screen, as I'll recommend in a moment, so for example, you might want the chat feed, you might want to see the participants window, it's going to be quite difficult for you to manage because everything's going to be overlapping. So a better way to do it is to put your PowerPoint slides into what's called reading view, which is that little button down the bottom. And what that means is that you can make it into something that's less of your screen. So in this case, maybe make it about half of my screen. And what I'm going to do then is share this particular window. And it still looks quite neat in reading mode. So yeah, participants sort of get a very similar experience from their end, but it makes you as the host much easier in managing things. So to share this, I need to come back to my Zoom page, and I'm going to click Share Screen at the bottom here. I'm going to pick the one I want to share, which is this PowerPoint slideshow, and I click Share, and it puts a green box around it, telling me that that's the part of my screen that's now being shared to participants. And I'll just hold up this iPad to the webcam. You should be able to see that as a participant, that's exactly what they're seeing now is that page. So we'll just talk about what's on that page and why it's what we're trying to get participants to do here. So firstly, I put the name of the session just so that, again, people know they're in the right place. While they're waiting, what I want people to do is mute their microphone while they're not speaking. So that's really important because if people have background noise happening, so dogs barking or a lawnmower going in the background, that can disrupt the audio feed quite significantly. So that's a really important rule to emphasize. The next thing I had there was getting people to become familiar with the chat function. So on my screen, the chat is up here, and I'm just going to pop it down here. So people can type in here and send messages. I'd recommend to everyone, just to introduce who they are. The last thing I had there was to click the yes button, and that was just so I had an idea of how many people had actually engaged with those steps. So in my view, I click up the top here, Manage Participants, and what I can see is, I'm just going to make this a bit smaller, what I can see is each of the people in my call, and if they're going to click yes, it will show up against their names. So let me just give you an example of what that looks like. So I've just clicked yes on the iPad, and you can see here now there's a tick appearing against their names. You can see down the bottom here, you get sort of a tally of how many people have ticked yes or no. So you can use that to sort of gauge how many people have completed that process as well. And again, the idea of that is just to get people familiar with, okay, that's a function in Zoom that I'm probably going to get them to use later on. All right, so I'll just pause there and you can see what I mean now, hopefully, about having the PowerPoint slide just on half of your screen, because then it means you can see it in addition to the participants and the chat as well. And if you want to have the webcams viewing, you can have that as another part as well. I think it's because I don't have my video on at the moment. I can't actually see that. And no one else does either. But you can end up showing all the different webcam views of the participants in your particular call. All right, so we'll jump on to the next page. So I am Sarah. I'm a lecturer in Qualt. My background is in engineering and mathematics, where I've taught for the past couple of years in some of the bigger units in the first and second year levels. So I'm going to talk you through this session today. Normally I would have a co-host hosting this session, just because if we get really big participant numbers, it can be difficult to manage the chat function at the same time as trying to run the session. So if I had that, I would introduce you to them as well. All right, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on QUT stands, the Turrbal and Yugara people, and pay my respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and recognise that these lands have been places of teaching, research and learning, and that QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So in terms of the goals for today's session, I'm going to give you a bit of a brief introduction to the online teaching and how it differs a little bit from face-to-face. This session, since it's been modified a bit from the interactive version, hopefully you'll be able to gain some familiarity of what the features look like from the host's perspective. And specifically, we're going to look at nonverbal feedback, polling, breakout rooms, screen sharing and annotations. And I'll talk through as we go some practical tips around how you can use these features for your teaching, including examples for lectures, tutorials and drop-in sessions. So issues for learners in the online environment can differ a little bit to those issues that students face face-to-face. So a couple of examples of what those are. Expectations mismatch. So what that means is that the educators' expectations of what the students should be doing and vice versa don't quite align. We can see some issues around the readiness of students for online learning. In particular, we know that students need to be more self-managed and self-regulated in their learning to be successful online. They need to also motivate themselves a bit more than what we see in face-to-face environments. There can also be a barrier around the technical skills that students have to be able to engage in the online environment. So for example, becoming familiar with this Zoom setup and being able to interact with the features that the educator is asking them to could be an additional challenge. Online learners can face issues around isolation because they aren't having that sort of regular contact with their fellow peers and their teachers. And participation, again, can be a bit of a challenge because we're having to run through something like, say, a Zoom program to be able to get that engagement. So specifically, this session today is looking at Zoom, which is a tool that's really good for running synchronous sessions. And by synchronous, what I mean is a session where all of the people are participating at the same time. So synchronous sessions can be really good for building a sense of community because we have those interactions happening between the participants. It's a good opportunity for students to get immediate feedback because, we're facilitating something real time. They're able to, have those quick knowledge checks of, do I understand or do I know it? And when run regularly, synchronous sessions are good for keeping students on track because it's sort of this point in time, say each week, where they're going to be more motivated, I guess, to engage with their learning. So situations where Zoom is a suitable tool, there's a few examples I've got here. So one of them is for online classes. So just note that if you want to use it for online classes, there's a limit of 300 participants that can be involved. And if you want to use the breakout room feature, which we'll look at a bit later, there's a limit of 200 people for that. I had a few questions about if you Google Zoom, the free version of it has lower limits on being able to use I think for participants and also for the timing of your sessions. So I think the free version, for example, you can only record for 45 minutes. However, if you log into Zoom via your QUT corporate account, there's no limit on how long you can record for on Zoom, and there's also these limits for the participants. So other situations you could use Zoom for is oral presentations. So if you have students that are going to present something back to, say, the class, you're able to get them to use their webcams, and also they can screen share at the same time. So it can be quite appropriate for that. Student consultations. So you can set up a room for you and, say, 1 or 2 other students to discuss things. You can pre-record lectures on Zoom, although we know that there's a lot of other software programs that have that capability, so it's up to you. And the last one I've got there is student group meetings. So students are able to go into Zoom and create their own meetings on their own, where they will be the hosts of that particular meeting, and invite their fellow group members to join them in that. So a couple of things before you sort of start up your Zoom sessions. The first thing I'd really recommend is doing a check at the start of your class that your systems are working. So that means your webcam is good, you've got a background that's kind of clean, your microphone is working so people can hear you, and so on. So a good way of doing that is to perhaps log in a little bit early and greet a couple of your participants who come in, and that way you can have that double check that yes, the system is working. Establishing some ground rules. So this is going to be particularly important for the first sessions that you run. So in particular, I'd emphasize the muting of the microphone when you're not speaking rule, just because, again, that background noise can be quite disruptive. However, if you have someone that is not able to mute their microphone for whatever reason, can't find it, for example, you do have the opportunity to do it up here. Now, at the moment, I haven't actually connected the audio on these 2 other devices just because it would reverberate. But usually, if they had their audio connected, you'd be able to see a microphone thing, just like you can see for mine there, and you'd be able to hover over, and one of the options here would be to mute them. So the next one I've got there is preference for webcams. So depending on the size of your session, you may or may not want them on. I'd recommend for smaller sessions, it's probably nice because it's a bit more personal when you can see other people's faces. However, if you're running a session that's, say got 300 people in it, it's probably not going to be particularly useful to have the webcams on for that one. And it's also going to be a big drain on the internet streaming speed. So I'd recommend in those larger sessions probably that you suggest students turn their webcams off. The next thing I've got there is disclose whether you're recording your session. So you can record your session in Zoom. You can set it up to record automatically when you create your meeting. Otherwise, in the options up here, one of them I believe is to record. Oh, yeah, sorry. Record on this computer or record to the cloud. So that's the 2 options to set up. I'd probably recommend recording to the cloud as opposed to your computer, just because then all the processing happens out in, I think it's AARNet, and your computer sort of doesn't have to sit there chugging away for a very long time. And all that happens is it's similar to Echo 360. You get sent an email saying that your video has been processed by that external provider, and you can download it to your computer and then use it as you want. The last thing I've got there on the slide is private messaging for communicating sensitive information. So obviously in the larger room, it's going to be challenging for students to sort of possibly communicate with you, sort of maybe it's around assessment or a very specific question that they have that only relates to them. So you can suggest that students message you privately through the chat function if they do want to share that with you. So in the chat window here, there's an option to send a message to everyone, or you can choose a particular person within the meeting. Then it will say it's going to them privately, and it will show up in there. All right, so the other thing is sort of around reiterating expectations of behaviour when people are online. So we know that in online spaces, people can be a bit more inclined to say things that they wouldn't say to people face to face. So really emphasising respect of fellow learners, of fellow teachers is really, really important. Emphasizing turn taking. So for example, if you send people to breakout rooms where they've got a smaller group that they're going to have a discussion with, encouraging students in that group to use the names of the people that they're talking to, just because we don't have the sort of body language that we're used to where you face someone, you're talking to them. So a way to get around that is to use people's names and to encourage participation so that you don't sort of have really dominant group members and really quiet ones. I'd also recommend that you discuss with students that interacting in the online space can be a little bit more clunky than it is face-to-face. So for example, with the muting of the microphones on and off, that can take quite a bit of time to sort of get used to having to make that change. So just emphasizing that it's okay if it's a little bit of effort in the first instance. And if students are having troubles with their technology, that using the group chat is also an option as well. All right, so in the online environment, opportunities for spontaneous formative feedback between the teacher and the student are lost. So this is something that we can sort of try to get back using our tools within Zoom. So that's what we're going to talk through now. So the first one is non-verbal feedback, which we sort of played with at the very beginning of our session. So under the participants menu, you get a few different options such as yes, no, go slower, go faster, thumbs up, thumbs down, and so on. So me as the host, I can see earlier that Sarah's iPad had clicked yes. I'm actually able to clear everything that's in there and sort of reset and ask a new question. So in the interactive session, I asked a particular question and got people to engage with that. So I think the question I asked was, are you Zooming from a QUT campus? So then my participants would answer yes or no. So let's just do an example of that. All right, so I've got my participants to answer, and I can see again that I get a count of how many are on each of the different options. So a few things to be aware of. It's a really easy way of performing polling in your class if you have like yes or no type questions. You can clear the responses at any time and ask new questions as you go. And just be aware though that the responses are visible to everyone in this participants window, so all my people can see what everyone else answered. So another way of sort of trying to get this interaction back with your participants is through asking and answering questions. So there's a few different ways that you can do this via Zoom. So one of them is to use the raise hand function. So this is found through the participants window again. Now I don't see that as the host because obviously I'm the host, not the participant. So what I'm going to do is clear everything and I'm going to get one of my participants here to raise their hand. All right, and they see that as just another option in this section. All right, so you can see up here Sarah's iPad has raised their hand. So you could use this as a way of asking a question of your class, and to get then people to respond, they put up their hand like they would in a face-to-face class, and then you can call on them to respond. So once they've responded, the person is able to lower their hand again. Otherwise, if they're not able to or can't find it on their screen, you're able to do it as the host. So you just hover over them, click lower hand, and it will remove it for them. So the other way that you can sort of encourage students to potentially contribute to the conversation is I could ask a general question of my participants and they could then respond via the chat. Okay, so basically it's a case of just opening up the chat window, and for them they just need to make sure that they have everyone in the to box. So I think the question I asked during the session that I ran interactively was, what feature of Zoom are you most interested in experiencing? So I'll just do a quick example of what that would look like if a participant responded. So they're going to send a response to everyone, and we can see it then appearing down here in the chat. So again, it's a good way of just getting a really quick sort of list of things that people think about whatever particular question that you've asked. So a few things to keep in mind with this. You can assign a co-host to monitor your chat feed. And again, I'd highly recommend that if you have a big session. Otherwise, it becomes very overwhelming to sort of have your screen going with what you want to talk about. Look at the participants window, look at the chat window, and if you have webcams on as well, looking at that. You can consider planning designated times during your session for students to ask questions and for you to respond. So I'd probably recommend that if you are just running a session on your own, so that, you're not constantly going back and forth between the chat. You can just say, okay, I'm taking questions now, pop them in, and you can respond verbally back to them. And just be aware you can save your chat feed as well. So it's down the bottom here in the more. It says save chat. Oh, sorry, this is conflicting with the webcam view I've got. Here we go, save chat. So then at the end of the session, when you end the meeting, it will save into a folder, the Zoom folder on your computer. So the last thing I had here was just how you can actually assign a co-host. So up here, if you go more, there's an option here to make them a co-host. So I'm going to pick that for this one. Click yes, and it will pop in the brackets here what the role of that person is within the meeting. So the co-host gains extra powers, so they get some of this extra stuff that I have up here compared to participants. And I'd recommend for the chat, making sure that you have the co-host listed, just in case students forget who it is, they can go back and look at the participants list. All right, so effective online teaching utilises pedagogies that entice, engage and educate students, such as student-centred and active learning approaches. And we know that's pretty much the same as face-to-face teaching. We know that students need to be actively engaged in their learning for it to be most effective. So thinking about some ways that we can do that on the Zoom sessions. The first one I'm going to talk through is polling. So basically for this, you can set up polls beforehand via your Zoom account, and then you can then launch them during your Zoom session. Now, an interesting quirk of Zoom is that you can't screen share and have your poll running at exactly the same time. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing this for the moment. And I'm going to go into polls. And this is one I've pre-made earlier. If you have multiple, you can pick which one you want to do. And I'm going to launch the poll. So this now provides my participants with a similar view to this, where they're able to essentially go through and pick an answer that they want to respond with. So I'm going to go in as my phone and pick an option. I've clicked submit, and you can see now that you've seen that one of the people has responded. And I'll just do the same thing on here. Oh, I can't vote actually on this one now because I've made it a co-host. Sorry. So I'm going to have to end the polling there just with the one participant. So yeah, only participants can vote, not hosts or co-hosts. So I'll end the polling, and it sort of takes that down, and then I can share the results back to my participants. And unless you click the share, they won't be able to see what the results were. So I click share, and then it will pop up on their screen with what the results actually were. So again, that's a way you can engage students by possibly asking a question and then seeing where sort of the room lies on that particular response. So I'll click stop share, close that off, and we'll jump back to my PowerPoint slides. So a fun feature of Zoom is that when you sort of go back to the screen share mode, you lose the other things you had up. So you can just get them back through participants and group chat if you want to keep them. All right, so with respect to polling, a few tips. So the first one is that you can set up the polls before your session so that you just sort of easily launch them when you want them. Polling can be done anonymously, which is a bit different to the yes/no voting that we saw before through the participants menu. Participants cannot see the responses to your poll unless you choose to share them back. The results of the poll can be saved for you to go back and see later if you want to through the online interface. and you cannot screen share and run your poll at the same time. So just be aware of that. All right, so the next thing I've got here is looking at screen sharing, which is what I've already been doing for this session. So again, it's just through the share button. At the moment, since I've already got something shared, it says new share. So if you want to do something different. And you have a few different options on what you can share. So you can either share the overall screen that you've got going, all right? And now at the moment, I'm not actually doing that. The only reason you can see my full screen is because I have screen capture over the top. At the moment, the only thing I'm sharing is this particular PowerPoint window, all right? And you can see that that's exactly what my participants are seeing as well. So if you want to share your overall window, just be aware that one of the sort of challenges associated with that is if you have pop-ups that come up. So for example, if you have your email open and someone sends you an email, students will be able to see that if you've shared your whole screen. Instead, if you've just shared a particular application, so in this case, just the PowerPoint slides, participants won't be able to see anything, even if there's stuff like over the top of it, all right, because you've only shared that application. So again, participants only see exactly what is in that PowerPoint window. So the other thing that you can share is a virtual whiteboard, which can be quite cool. So I'm going to go up here to New Share and select it from my list. By the way, this is the one if you want to share your overall window. So I'm going to pick whiteboard though, and it's going to bring up a virtual whiteboard, which basically has the functionality of paint on it. So you can draw, there's like text, a few other things that you can play around with. And I think you can see right here, right now, sort of the challenge of having those multiple screens or multiple windows as the host. I've now got my participants window and my Zoom chat sort of over the top of this screen, so it's not quite ideal. I might make it a little bit smaller, make it a bit better. So yeah, that's something that you can get sort of students to bring up if they do want to like draw something or I don't know. Yeah, something that could be communicated, I guess, via a drawing more easily than some other means. So just be aware that you can clear everything that's on this and start again if you so choose. You can also save what's on your whiteboard to your Zoom recording as well. Put some things on here. So if you click save, it will show it in your Zoom folder. All right, so I'm going to stop that share. So a couple of other things that are worthwhile maybe talking through of what you could share is other applications. So for example, if I wanted to demonstrate the use of Excel, I could just share an Excel workbook and you can sort of real time demonstrate what you're doing in it and students are able to see that directly. And I used to teach engineering, as I mentioned, so one of the things that I would do a lot is demonstrating how to do calculations. So if you want to, you can set up, I usually use OneNote, with questions, pictures that are associated with it. And then if you have a pen associated with it, you can sort of write on the screen as you go, demonstrating how you go through those particular calculations. Now, I'm running this on a computer at the moment, so probably writing on a page like this isn't ideal. So one other thing that you could do if you want to sort of reproduce a DocCam sort of feel is rather than me sharing this particular screen, I could connect a second device that's still me as a participant. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to use my iPad instead. So what I can do then is share on the iPad. Let's say I share the whiteboard. All right, and then I'm able to sort of write and you're able to see my face at the same time via the computer's webcam, sort of reproducing what happens in those more fancy lecture theatres that we have. All right. I should mention as well, you can sort of give control of who can share and not share their screens. It's down here in the menu at the bottom. I might just end this and walk you through that. So down here, I can set it so that only one person can share at a time, or you can have multiple if that's what you want. And under advanced sharing options, you can change who can actually share. So if you want to prevent your participants from sharing something, you can change it to host. This includes co-hosts. So the iPad co-host would then have the opportunity to share. Cool. So I'll jump back to my PowerPoint slides and get back my pages that sort of went away. So a couple of other tips with this. I mentioned it at the very beginning, but if you want to share PowerPoint slides, I'd highly recommend putting it in this reading view down the bottom right, just because, again, you can have it taking up only part of your screen and you have the other parts of your screen with other things. You can consider sharing just the application rather than the overall screen. Again, just because then if you have things popping up on top of it, it's not going to interfere. And you can demonstrate a whole range of things, including the use of software, live calculations, and I'm sure you can think of many other things that would be appropriate for your particular context. So related to that is annotations. So you can annotate on someone's shared screen, and this is done through view options, all right, and then annotate. I don't have that at the moment though, because I'm sort of the host view. If I wanted to annotate straight on top of this, I'd just click the annotate here. So again, depending on whether you're participant view or host view. So basically this brings up the same stuff as before when we had the whiteboard open, and you can then draw on top of whatever has been shared. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whiteboard. Just be aware that participants also have the ability to do that. So if they wanted to, they could go through and add things onto my shared screen. If you want to prevent participants from being able to do that, there is a way. So firstly, if I want to clear it, I go clear all. And then up here in my options, I have the option to disable participants annotation, which means they wouldn't be able to write on my shared screen. Or you can show the names of people that are annotating as well, if that's possibly useful, depending on the activity that you're doing. All right, so I'm going to jump on now. So a couple of tips. So as I mentioned, you can disable participants from annotating on things, which probably would be useful unless you're expecting them to annotate something, and show the names as well. All right, so the next feature we're going to look at is breakout rooms. So these are basically mini Zoom rooms that run in parallel to each other, and there's only going to be a smaller subset of participants in each of those rooms. So these can be used to encourage discussion in smaller group settings, which we know is useful when you have students who are quite introverted or not particularly confident. They might be more likely to share their thoughts in a smaller group setting. And then you can use that to sort of bring back to the room, call on one person from each of the different groups to report back on what they discussed. You can also use breakout rooms to have students work in teams, and you can couple it with the other features of Zoom. So participants have the ability to share screens and to annotate as well within their Zoom room, within their breakout room. And you can use breakout rooms to create a private area for you to talk with a particular student. So we talked about sort of at the beginning the private messaging, if there's something that students want to bring up that maybe isn't appropriate for the larger room. So if as well you could create a breakout room for you and that particular student, and it would take you away from the main room and you'd be able to have that discussion privately. So a couple of tips, you can either manually assign or randomly assign groups within your breakout. So I'll bring that up here. So breakout rooms. So you can see in the screenshot, I have the choice for either automatic or manual. You can't see what's going to be happening in the breakout rooms once you create them, unless you choose to join the room. You can broadcast messages to the breakout rooms, but these do disappear quite quickly. So you can write a message, send it off, and it will appear as a pop-up for your participants, but after a few seconds it sort of disappears again. So instead of using instead of using the broadcast feature, a different way to do it is to put your instructions into the chat, send it to everyone before you send them to the breakout rooms, and that chat stays with them while they're in there. So let's do an example. Let's say I'm going to do an automatic allocation. I can click create rooms, At the moment, I've only got 2 participants, and I think I had 2 breakout rooms. So, and I think I had 1 breakout room. So both of them have ended up in it. If I wanted to change it though, this is like the manual part. You could add a room, and then you could, move to the other breakout room instead. All right. So what happens for participants when you send them to breakout rooms is as soon as I click this open all rooms, they'll receive a pop-up like this that says you're being invited to join the breakout room. They just need to click on join and they will be taken there. They won't be able to see the main room anymore. So participants can come back to the main room at any time if they choose to leave the breakout room. But I, as the host, have the ability to close the breakout rooms when it's time to move on, so they'll receive an indication when they need to come back. Participants in the breakout rooms can ask for help, and that sends a message to me as the host saying, so-and-so is requesting for you to join breakout room 1. Do you want to join? And I can click yes, similar to what this one has here, and it takes me from the main room into that particular breakout. You'll receive a pop-up message, you as the participants I should say, with a countdown timer when breakout rooms are closing. They don't have to leave immediately, but if they haven't left by the time the countdown reaches 0, then they'll be just kicked out. So in the interactive sessions, I did a practice of this where people got to experience what it was like to be in a breakout room. And I asked people to introduce themselves, turning on their microphone and webcam so that it was a bit more of that personal experience, and to explore how they could do the screen sharing and annotations within their breakout room. So I'm going to do that now, demonstrate opening all the breakout rooms. So I click open, it says that everyone's been invited to join. So I'm going to click join for my 2 fake participants. And you can see that they have gone to green for the light here when they've actually joined that room. So if I want to do the broadcast message, all right, I can type something here, broadcast it. And if there was like more, technical instructions that might need to be given, I could pre-type them like I've done here, and just paste it in as well. Now, I forgot to do the other bit with the chat function. So if you were to do the chat function, again, I had the instructions here of what I wanted people to do inside the breakout rooms. So I should have posted that in the chat before they left so that they had it with them while they were within those breakout rooms. All right, so I'll just do one more example of sending a broadcast message, and I'll hold up the iPad of what it looks like in there. Oh, I've lost my breakout room page. Here we go. So if I broadcast a message to my rooms, broadcast, you can see that it pops up on the top there. All right, saying what that message was. It stays up for maybe like, 10 seconds, something like that, and then it will disappear. So once you're done with the breakout rooms, you can click close all rooms. All right, that starts the timer, all right, and it sends a message to the participants saying the breakout rooms are closing, and they have the opportunity to click leave now, or they can stay in it, as I said, until the countdown timer finishes, and at that point they're automatically kicked out. So I'm just clicking leave for both of those. All right, so I'm going to close this now. I can see that I have my 3 participants back with me in the main room, so I can move on. All right, so a few general tips for planning Zoom sessions. So one of them I'd suggest is to keep it really simple, at least in the first instance. So this presentation has gone through a lot of different features of Zoom. To run an effective session, you probably don't need to use every single one of them. So maybe you can gradually introduce them to your students if you're running those regular sessions, so that they don't become overwhelmed with all the different things that they're trying to navigate. I'd really suggest orientating students to the features that you want them to use. So including like the screenshots can be quite handy, so that students know what they're sort of looking for on the screen to be able to, say, give a yes or no answer to a poll. I'd suggest segmenting your sessions. What that means is basically designating times for breaks in between for students to take, especially if you're going to run really interactive sessions. It can be quite draining even in the even in the online environment to sort of keep that energy up. Give really clear signposting and instructions in the online space, just because it's much more difficult for students to seek that clarification on how things are going, or if they're a little bit confused about what they should be doing. So just making sure that you're really clear about what you're expecting from students, what timing you're expecting them to spend on different activities, and so on. Shorter sessions can be better for this online space. So a couple of suggestions might be, if you have, say, a 1-hour tutorial that you're running weekly, rather than running that full hour as a online Zoom session, what you could consider doing is splitting a class in half and possibly running 2 30-minute sessions. So the same thing twice, with half the students in each. What that would mean is you'd cut down the number of students in those sessions. So you could probably make it a bit more interactive and personal and make sure that you're individually answering all the students' questions, as opposed to if you have a really, really big class, I guess there's that anonymity and it can be a bit more challenging to manage. Another idea though, I should have mentioned as well, with that other 30 minutes, you could develop some activities for students to do outside of your particular designated session. Follow-up activities. So another suggestion to sort of make managing your session more easily is that you could consider combining 2 tutorials together. And yes, that would double your numbers, but it would mean that you have 2 tutors allocated to that session. So you could then have one sort of running the PowerPoint or whatever activities, the facilitation, and you could have the second tutor managing the chat feed. Again, if you have a really big session, it's probably worthwhile having that second person there if you can, because otherwise it can be quite overwhelming to manage. And the last tip I've got there is to seek peer support. So you can consider partnering with someone else to run your first Zoom session, and you could return the favor to make it happen. Again, it's probably a way of sort of taking the pressure off, especially for that first session where you're still building familiarity with all the different features of Zoom. And if you have any technical problems, you have that second person there to help you troubleshoot. All right, so this is just a study that was done looking at students' perceptions of what what effective teaching looked like. And it compared the online and face-to-face environments. So I think what's important to note here is that the characteristics of good teaching that students are looking for are really quite similar across those 2 spaces. So the most important ones are listed at the top here, going down. So really the one that's the most different across those 2 lists is responsiveness. So what this means is, even if we're running these Zoom sessions, on a regular basis, in online learning, students are going to be looking a bit more for their teachers to respond to them more quickly. So for example, if they send an email to you, they're probably going to expect a response quicker than if it was a regular face-to-face environment. So what this means is you might want to think about other ways that you could respond to students rather than just say direct emails. One thing to consider that I'm going to talk about in a moment is there's a Padlet feature, which is basically one way that you could collect student questions together, and then you could answer them to the wider audience, pulling together those key themes that keep coming up. And that might be a more effective way or a more efficient way of responding to students on a bigger basis. So the last thing that was in this interactive session that was run was this Padlet wall, where people were able to ask their various questions and we provided answers back to them. So if you haven't used it before, Padlet is basically a tool for creating and sharing an interactive notice board. And I'll pop up what that sort of looks like here. Let's get rid of these other things. All right, so you can post resources, you can post links, and what we used it for primarily was for people to ask their questions. So they can just add a question anonymously, and you can respond back to those questions as well. So, yep, that's one tool if you want to sort of collate together student questions and respond to them. So what I'll point out is that if you want the resources that was used for this particular session, they are on the Padlet, and I'll put a link to them where this video is posted as well, so that you can get to it. And I'll flash up as well. This here is also the link to be able to access the Padlet wall as well. All right. So the very last bit of this presentation was just talking through some further resources that you can go to if you do have any particular things you want to look into. So on the Padlet wall, there was some links given to, again, the slides that were presented today. There's also a couple of tip sheets for how to upload a Zoom recording to Echo 360, how to set up polls within your Zoom, and how to create an initial Zoom meeting as well, including a description of what all the different settings are. If you did want any advice on how to sort of pursue converting your teaching to potentially Zoom sessions or other appropriate ways of delivering via technology, the learning designers are the key contact point for that, those inquiries, and there's the contact details there for the various different faculty teams. So that's pretty much all I have, I think, for today's presentation. I hope this has been useful to you. And good luck with all of your, I guess, Zoom teaching going forward. So, thank you.